while they're doing those sort of nice things, they're also playing a role in lowering taxes for corporations and lowering taxes for wealthy people, you know, and reconfiguring public policy. What we don't see is all that reconfiguring going on. We don't see them vacuuming out the money, vacuuming out the insides of public processes. But we do see the nice facade.
By a guy named Dan Rather, who insisted on putting it on a show called 60 Minutes on corporate television. And he got his behind fired. Now, how did that happen? The answer is not because his story was wrong. Yeah, there are a couple little doodads he added, which I didn't have, which were not accurate. Fine. He lost his job because CBS, that CBS eyeball is not an eyeball. It's a pimple on the corporate behind of a company called Viacom. Viacom owned CBS. Viacom was run by a guy named Sumner Redstone. And Redstone said, Viacom is my life. Viacom is my life, and everything I do is to help Viacom. And he said, and Viacom needs a Republican Congress and needs a Republican in the White House. And Rather's report threatened that because Bush was running for re-election back in 2004. And that is why he was fired, because it was a corporation, Viacom, which could not handle getting out the news which would threaten their bottom line.
The Giacobardi case was one of the great judicial moments in world history, and the public was totally unaware it was actually happening as the process was being engaged. General Electric and Professor Giacobardi went to the patent office with a little microbe that eats up oil spills. They said they had modified this microbe in the laboratory, and therefore it was an invention. The patent office, the U.S. government, took a look at this, quote, invention. They said, no way. The patent statutes don't cover living things. This is not an invention. Turned down. And then General Electric and Dr. Giacobardi appealed to the U.S. Customs Court of Appeal. And to everyone's surprise, by a 3-2 decision, they overrode the patent office. We bring good things to life. And they said, this microbe looks more like a detergent or a reagent than a horse or a honeybee. I laughed because they didn't understand basic biology. It looked like a chemical to them. Had it had an antenna or eyes or wings or legs, it would never have crossed their table and been patented. Then the patent office appealed. And what the public should realize now is the patent office was very clear that you can't patent life. My organization provided the main amicus curiae brief. If you allow the patent on this microbe, we argued, it means that without any congressional guidance or public discussion, corporations will own the blueprints of life. When they made the decision, we lost by 5-4, and Chief Justice Warren Burger said, sure, some of these are big issues, but we think this is a small decision. 7 years later, the U.S. Patent Office issued a one-sentence decree. You can patent anything in the world that's alive except a full-birth human being.
The Supreme Court of the United States ruled today that living organisms produced in the laboratory may be patented. This decision to extend
the U.S. Supreme Court had to decide was whether one man or one company should be able to control new forms of life.
We allow
in answering yes.
a company or college to exclusively own a species. What does that say about our reverence for life?
Researchers at Harvard manipulated the genes of mice, making their offspring more susceptible to cancer. They patented the Harvard mouse in the U.S., Europe, and Japan. Then tried to do the
legal battle that finally came to an end today. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled the genetically engineered mouse can't rights to it.
Canadians don't think that life forms are inventions of industry, like bulbs and
scientists and drug companies search the planet for genes. Companies scouring the planet looking for valuable DNA. Genes they can patent or sell.
DNA. Feels a lot like the Wild West. We've got bandits going around the world, collecting wherever they can, sometimes under false pretenses.
Because it's been so isolated, Newfoundland has a unique gene pool, and there's been so much interest from gene prospectors, the government is funding a study.
Really has been taken away from me, and there's not one person has saved scientific research.
Instead of being the impartial pursuit of the truth, has become the pursuit of profit.
We've all been hearing about the announcement that we have mapped the human genome, but what the public doesn't know is now there's a great race by genomic companies and biotech companies and life science companies to find the treasure in the map. The treasure are the individual genes that make up the blueprint of the human race. Every time they capture a gene and isolate it, these biotech companies claim it as intellectual property. The breast cancer gene, the cystic fibrosis gene, it goes on and on and on. If this goes unchallenged in the world community, within less than 10 years, a handful of global companies will own directly or through license the actual genes that make up the evolution of our species, and they're now beginning to patent the genomes of every other creature on this planet. In the age of biology, the politics is going to sort out between those who believe life first has intrinsic value, and therefore we should choose technologies and commercial venues that honor the intrinsic value, and then we're going to have people who believe, well, look, life is simply utility. It's commercial fair, and they will line up with the idea to let the marketplace be the ultimate arbiter of all of the age of biology.
What Fox neglected to report is this. Jane sued Fox under Florida's whistleblower statute, which protects those who try to prevent others from breaking the law. But her appeal court judges found that falsifying news isn't actually against the law. So they denied Jane her whistleblower status, overturned the case, and withdrew her $425,000 award. Canada and Europe have upheld the ban on RBGH, yet it remains hidden in much of the milk supply of the United States. The prospect that 2/3 of the world's population will have no access to fresh drinking water by 2025 has provoked the initial confrontations in a worldwide battle for control over the planet's most basic resource. When Bolivia sought to refinance the public water service of its third largest city, the World Bank required that it be privatized, which is how the Bechtel Corporation of San Francisco gained control over all of Cochabamba's water, even that which fell from the sky.
Mussolini was greatly admired all across the spectrum. Business loved him. Investment shot up. And suddenly when Hitler came in Germany, the same thing happened there. The investment shot up in Germany. He had the workforce under control. He was getting rid of dangerous left-wing elements. Investment opportunities were improving. There was no problems. These are wonderful countries.
I think one of the greatest untold stories of the 20th century is the collusion between corporations, especially in America, and Nazi Germany. First, in terms of how the corporations from America helped to essentially rebuild Germany and support the early Nazi regime. And then, when the war broke out, figured out a way to keep everything going. So General Motors was able to keep Opel going. Ford was able to keep their thing going, and companies like Coca-Cola, they couldn't keep the Coca-Cola going, so what they did was they invented Fanta Orange for the Germans, and that's how Coke was able to keep their profits coming in to Coca-Cola. So when you drink Fanta Orange, that's the Nazi drink that was created so that Coke could continue making money while millions of people died.
When Hitler came to power in 1933, his goal was to dismantle and destroy the Jewish community. This was an enterprise so fast that it required the resources of a computer. But in 1933, there was no computer. What there was the IBM punch card system, which controlled and stored information based upon the holes that were punched in various rows and columns. Naturally, there was no off-the-shelf software as there is today. Each application was custom designed, and an engineer had to personally configure it. It was the IBM machinery and punch card system which enabled the entire extermination by labor program. This is where hundreds of thousands of Jews and other enemies of the Reich were simply worked to death based upon their location, their job skills. They were moved from place to place, and then there was slave labor billing. All of it was done on IBM machines. Now, the concentration camps, it's a very, very special case. Millions of people of all religions and nationalities and characteristics went through the concentration camp system. Hundreds of camps, thousands of sub-camps. That That's an extraordinary traffic management program that required an IBM system in every railroad direction and an IBM system in every concentration camp. This is a typical contract with IBM and the Third Reich. As you can see, it's not with the Dutch subsidiary, even though it's concluded in Amsterdam. It's not with the German subsidiary. It is with the IBM Corporation in New York.
You know, as it happens, I know that story. I discussed it more than once with old Mr. Watson, and I was around at the time. I'm not saying that Watson didn't know that the German government used punch cards. He probably did know. After we had very few customers, Watson didn't want to do it. Watson not because he thought it was immoral or not, but because Watson, with a very keen sense of public relations, thought it was risky.
No one is saying that the Holocaust would not have happened without IBM, but technology did enable the Third Reich to accomplish their goals faster.
And has displaced politics and politicians as the new high priests and reigning oligarchs of our system. So capitalism and its principal protagonists and players, corporate CEOs, have been accorded unusual power and access. This is not to deny the significance of government and politicians, but these are the new high priests.
These are decisions that must be made by government and not by corporations. And it's very dangerous. It's very beguiling to say, why don't we have a philosopher king as a corporate CEO? Let him decide. Let the great leader decide. History, it would be very rude with that suggestion. And they would say that power that's accountable to nobody is not really power that we can tolerate in this world.
If you take this to its logical conclusion, one would have an image that we are, in fact, at the end of the world is nigh, and we are all completely brainwashed, and there's no space left, and I don't believe we're there yet. And I think it's really important that we don't overstate the case, and that we admit that there are cracks and fissures in all of these corporate structures, and sometimes when a corporation is concentrating on one particular project, they look the other way, and all kinds of interesting things happen in the corner.
It is the case in every period of history where injustice based on falsehoods, based on taking away the right and freedoms of people to live and survive with dignity, that eventually, when you call a bluff, the tables turn.
I think it's too simple to say, let's get rid of all corporations and that will solve the problems of the world. There are things that can be done, and only can be done, it seems, when people organize and are, at least in part, motivated by profit. And so, to my mind, this is a question of tendencies run out of control or influence well beyond the bounds of legitimacy.
It's a relationship issue between human beings and our institutions.
I believe that there should be strong governmental controls on these corporations in terms of their behavior, in terms of what they can do. People will say, well, no, that's a different kind of government. Well, what kind of government? What kind of government is that other than a democracy? These companies should be more democratic. The whole economy should be more democratic, meaning that you and I have a say in what's going on. Right now, we have little or no say in what's happening.
The structures of transnational economics are up and running. They're having good and bad effects all around the world. Lots of bad ones, for sure. But to my mind, it's not whether the effects are good or bad that's the primary question. The primary question is, how do we make them democratically accountable? Because only if we do that can we even assess the goodness or badness and have some influence over it.
Well, a group in Arcata is speaking out against corporate power, and it's asking for your support. The group, called Citizens Concerned About Corporations, is organizing a signature drive to get an initiative on the November ballot. The initiative would require the city of Arcata to host 2 town hall meetings in which participants would discuss large corporations' power structure. It would also require the city to form a committee to advise leaders about corporate policies.
I can't think of a better place to be. If this many people around the country would do this instead of watching Super Bowl Sunday, our nation would be controlled by the people, not by the corporations.
Corporations are not accountable to the democratic process. That's what this is about. I don't want to make decisions about everything that goes on in their corporation, but I do have a strong belief that they need to be held accountable to us. This is our place to live. This is our place.
As I understand Measure F, would be to stop in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily punitive, the activities of corporations that cause harm to the citizens of Arcata and the environment that we depend on for life.
The problem is the huge corporations that are not here. One of the things that's talked about here is harm. And the question I have for those people is, who determines what harm is? You can have a corporation that obeys every law of the land and can still be producing harm.
My question is, can it be done differently? What are we afraid of? I mean, are all the businesses going to leave Arcata? I don't think so. And if they did, we deal with it, or we figure it out, or we do something different. We're creative people. I just don't see why we're afraid.
The path we're on that Measure F would lead to is the road to serfdom. If you think it's tough making a decision where to buy your stuff today, how tough do you think it is when there's only one provider, and it's the state? And by the way, you don't get to have this little democracy forum in those communities either.
This issue that we are in some way proposing central government control or socialism really is absurd. What we're proposing is democratic authority over corporations.
I think the better way is to boycott. If we don't like, certain product, if we don't like Pepsi Cola or Bank of America, or if you don't like what they do, don't use them. That's the way I see the, people's power is.
You have a lot more money than me. You have more votes than I do. If we use the model of boycott and voting with your dollars, that's an undemocratic situation.
People that say they fear their government, I really hope that they understand that they're allowed to participate in their government. They're not allowed to participate in anything that corporations do. So don't fear the government. Help it be the government that you won't fear.
This is beyond my wildest dreams. To see people talking to each other as if there's something we could do, as if we could figure something out,
No more chain restaurants in Arcata after a long-awaited decision by the...
We know what we need. It's actually a fairly simple set of steps. What we don't have is the political will.
We can change the government. That's the only way we're going to redesign, rethink, reconstitute what capital and property can do.
So what we need to do is to look at the very roots of the legal form that created this beast, and we need to think who can hold them accountable.
They're not graven in stone. They can be dismantled. In fact, most states have laws which require that they be dismantled.
For too long now, giant corporations have been allowed to undermine democracy here in the United States and all over the world. But today, the National Lawyers Guild and 29 other groups and individuals are fighting back. We are calling upon State Attorney General Dan Lundgren to comply with California law and to revoke the corporate charter of the Union Oil Company of California for its repeated and grievous offenses.
we have amidst us giant corporations who are repeat offenders year after year, decade after decade. This is a statute that is well known. It has been used. It can